Hey guys, it's JannLee here. I'm here for Game of the Week 7. A little bit behind this week, but trying to keep up with it. This week I'm pulling out a game from the archives. This is from Crazy House Weekly 17, so that would have been played nearly a couple of months ago. My opponent here was Karnivore, strong player. So I'm going to get into it. E4, knight c6, d4, knight f6. Now this is quite versatile in Crazy House. There's quite a few options. Bringing out the two knights is just fine in Crazy House. In this position, there's a lot black can choose from. You can choose from e5, d5. You might just play d6 or e6. There's a number of ways that black can proceed. My opponent Karnivore chose e5, so he's playing quite actively from the beginning. Capture, and pawn at d4. So this is, I know it's replacing the pawn where it was, but it's basically trying to claim the center. Now, there's options here. I mean, black can maybe retreat to g6. I've seen the knight retreat to c6 and also come to g4. My opponent chose the aggressive option, knight g4, and that's already making a commitment here. Because after white plays e5, this knight is tied down and defending this one. So if black backs this knight off, he's clearly behind. White's just picking up a free piece. So in playing knight g4, black's pretty much committing to playing this knight f2 sacrifice to gain some initiative early. I've captured the sacrifice, and this black knight doesn't really have anywhere to go. So if not for this move, pawn at b4, black probably wouldn't be able to get any form of compensation for this knight sacrifice. I've captured the knight, and my opponent captured my knight. Now, it is possible that black can capture with queen f6 first. I mean, it's a pawn with check, and then capture this knight. Against this, the troubles that white will have is if you just capture here, there's some dangerous checks here. You can end up losing your queen quite quickly. So white does need to be careful. To avoid the knight e4 check, I would recommend playing queen e2 check first. That just establishes some defense on e4. Against checks, you can always run the king back. And then later you might progress with knight at e4 or knight at d5. Something like that. So that's how you play against queen takes f6. Black took this directly, and being white here without having this pawn captured, I thought, well, I'll try to grab another pawn. Now, before just making the straight pawn grab, I played this queen e2 check for the reason I just explained, that it guards e4. And then I've grabbed this pawn to kind of just make use of it before it gets captured by the queen with check. So a little bit greedy there. And here already, if you look at the material, white's already up a cold piece. So white's up a knight. And it doesn't look like black's really got much going in white's half. Looks can be deceiving though. So I'll show you a continuation that's possible after queen h4 check. A natural thing is to block with the pawn, attack the queen, keep your defense solid. But black can play knight at e4, and again we can have these issues where if we run backwards, probably be losing the queen. You might lose more than the queen. In fact, in this case, I think you can get mated quite quickly. Knight takes queen would be fine here, but black doesn't need to settle for that. This is actually mate. King f3 runs into pawn at g4. King d2 runs into pawn at e3. So from not many moves ago, looking like white was completely safe, things can turn quite quickly. After knight e4 check, you can try running up potentially. There's some options there. It's still a game to play from here. Black can capture the knight here because this pawn on h2 is pinned. So there's plenty of play here. So my opponent has played queen h4 check. I saw some of the complications or the potential material I'd have to give back after pawn at g3, and I opted for a sharp move, which is actually moving pawn g3, which is not really intuitive because you'd think that's a good defender. It's covering f3 and h3, but what this move allows is king g2, which is a little bit of a safe haven for the king because it can't get checked by pawn at h3. And suddenly black is now under attack on 2 points. If he backs the queen off, then he's losing another knight, and the attack's really dissipating. So my opponent Karnivore took with knight c3 to basically try to keep his attacking chances alive. I captured the queen, and then I picked up a spare knight. Now, in the recapture of this knight, bishop takes e2 is more favourable because knight e2 leaves some weaknesses on h3 and f3, whereas bishop e2 really consolidates the light squares. We already have decent cover on the dark squares, so it's good to have some balance around the king. That's critical for a good defense. So to be honest, at this point, I felt like white's doing very well. It's now 2 pieces from maybe a couple, or maybe 1 pawn even, and black's still not much to attack with, and it's hard to penetrate white's position because black having just pawns, it's not easy to come in on the light squares. So I probably thought I was already winning in this situation, and I'll show you how I've let my guard down because Karnivore is very resourceful, and even from this position he did very well. So queen at e4 check, knight at f3. So knight at f3 was played probably to try to put some more defense on these pawns and hold on to everything. I think in hindsight something like pawn at f3 might have been a better choice because it actually covers the light squares better. And it also does not leave a knight available to be captured against something like pawn at g4. But let's proceed with the game. Knight at f3, bishop takes d4. So he's captured a little bit of material, but he's also controlling f2. So from here, I'm looking at, well, how do I progress? I just want to capture some more material if I can. Knight at b5 was played with 3 threats. A fork here, knight at d6 is a fork for the king and the queen, and also threatening to capture this bishop. So lots going on here. Now, pawn at h3 check. So suddenly, there's a sacrifice on the board and white's got to be careful. This knight's tied to the bishop, so I prefer to take this pawn with the king. King f1's not looking nice after pawn at g2, pawn at f2. I think black's getting quite a lot back. And here's the point I was making before, where the knight's on f3, and it's actually allowed this pawn at g4 check. And all of a sudden, white can get into some trouble if he comes back to g2 because he loses the knight with check. Knight at e1. There's ways that black can start making some initiative here. So my preference after pawn g4 was actually king g3, where if I lose the knight, at least I've got knight at d6 to pick off the queen. But that actually happened. So my opponent took, and I grabbed the queen. And here I still thought I was doing all right. I mean, there's not too much in black's hand, but I do need to be careful because black's actually preventing the white king from running back to safety immediately. And after knight at f5, king takes f3, I thought, okay, I'm just going to run safe here. He played knight at e1, which neatly still covers off the back. And all of a sudden, white's actually in very big danger here. And this is the sharp critical position. And I want to show how resourceful black is here with really just minor pieces of pawns and some awkwardly placed pieces from white. There are some dangerous mate threats here. Now, during the game, I kind of picked up quite quickly that I only have 2 options, and king g4 actually looked a lot more dangerous. In fact, king g4 is getting mated and loses, and I believe king f4 actually wins. And this is where Crazy House is really at its finest. So the key point being here is that black has ways of playing checks to hit these squares, and the key thing I think in this position is when the king gets to g5, we have to think about how black is going to check the white king. And the main check that white needs to avoid is this f6 check, which is supported by this bishop. So that's what's critical. So what I identified is that it's probably most important to run to f4 and make black play e5 first to block off this diagonal before proceeding to g5. That's actually the key point in this position. There are some other key points. I point out why king g4 first is losing to h5. So, for example, we've got a few options. We can come back here. We can go here. We can go here. If king f4, knight g2 is the resource for black, and the key difference here is that having played king g4 to f4 first, that allowed black to play h5. White does not have the g4 square anymore, which is critical to running away. In fact, white has to play probably something like king f3, but then black can capture here, and then after heading back, there's a neat trick where black can play bishop e5 check, and knight g6 if it's captured. If the white king moves back here, then pawn at f6 is there. So yeah, this should end up in mate as well. Knight at f2. The reason why bishop e5 needs to be played is so it can keep defending f6. That's the key point in this position. Okay, so king f4 doesn't work. If king h3, pawn at g4, capture, rook takes h4 is critical here. This is now opened up, and after this, pawn at h6 mates. So again here, if king g5 is played, then f6 looks like it will do the job. If you go king g6, there's pawn f7 mate. If you come up to f4, you should have bishop e5. So yeah, capture we've been through already is not much better. So in the game I played king f4, and white's still in trouble here. There's a lot for white to be careful about. At this point, bishop e5 doesn't quite work because that knight g6 resource isn't available. So black, to keep harassing the white king, needs to play e5. And here there's another fine point in that it looks like this knight's on offer, but it's actually poisoned. If white captures this, then d5 check is very dangerous, because now black's actually cutting off more and more squares. You'd be forced to play king g5. Now h6 works with pawn at g6 to finish. So white's walking in a minefield here, but now because e5 was played, the bishop is blocked off, and king g5 becomes a square available to the king, rather than playing as a new move. Oh, it looks like I actually went to g4 first. So I'm wondering here if there's a critical difference with king g5, if h6 can be played. I have a feeling I've played king g4 first to encourage h5 to be played, and that may just have a minor difference. Every pawn counts here, but okay, I think that the key point I wanted to establish is this f6 covered. So with king g4 being played, I'm still planning on running to g5. So king g4, h5. This knight is still poisoned, so if you play the check, the blocks here that white plays are insignificant. In fact, here maybe it's not poisoned. It might be that white can just get away. So yeah, I should correct myself there. I think white can actually get away. So the difference there is that with this pawn on h5, black now loses a pawn on h5 and doesn't have a spare one to put on g6. So maybe king takes f5 was playable in this position, but I stuck with king g5. pawn at h6, because he can't use the f6 square now. I was thinking maybe rook g8 might be another move, but then I think king takes h5 could just be surviving as well. So pawn at g6, yeah, check should run out here. Oh, I can capture that one even. So he played pawn at h6. Here the knight's poisoned. You'll definitely get mated there because all the pawns cover the right squares. So it's h5 that needs to be taken. Knight g7 check, king g4. Now I'm trying to run here or here. And my opponent played d5 check. And actually during the game here, I was nearly resigned to thinking I was mated because I thought after king g3, knight h5 was mate. In fact, the bishop defends h5, and it took me a little while to realize I was still safe. So yeah, it's really that close. My opponent was so resourceful this game. After king g3, knight f5, and then king h3 is necessary. And here's where white's actually starting to avoid some of the checks because now it's actually becoming blockable. So beyond this point, I believe white's winning, and it's a bit clearer. So our clocks are running short here, but by this time, once white establishes the first check with two queens in hand, the game should wrap up. So it continued d takes e4, pawn at d6, queen came on, and my opponent ran out of time here, but after king takes d4, queen at b3, it's fairly straightforward. But yeah, I think the reason for going through this game is largely to show how resourceful a player can be. I need to applaud how well my opponent did, despite me thinking I was winning much earlier than this. I think, there is actually a lot of finesse in how you can run your king. The critical point I think here was that f6 needs to be covered by this bishop, and there's some neat tricks that run around that. So look, I'm going to end this one there. Keep it short and sweet. Hope you enjoyed the analysis of this game. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.